Thank you, Peter. And hello, everyone. Nice to see some familiar and some new faces here at Teams Nation. It's pretty great that we have Teams Nation back again, right? After a bit of a hiatus. Great to be here. After hearing about all kinds of data security controls and data governance controls in Teams in the previous session, I think it's a pretty natural thing to start demoing some of these capabilities and start looking into how to actually use them in the next one, which is this one. So the catchy title of today is DLP in Teams, a game changer for raising everyday awareness. And my name is Tatu Seppälä. I'm a security and compliance architect at a company in Finland called Sulava. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in the Purview, which basically means I post on LinkedIn a lot. I do other stuff besides data security, but I mainly focus right now on insider risk and data security topics like the one today. So here at Teams Nation, I thought it'd be a good time to start with lots of demos, but to frame those demos and what we're going to be talking about here today, I want to kind of discuss what the actual challenge is, because there's not much point in using technology for technology's sake. We're always trying to solve some real life issue with it. If there's no real life issue, there's no real use to implement anything. On the security side anyway. It's all about risk management. So we're going to be talking about the challenge. We're going to be demoing stuff. I'm going to give some tips about, some specific tips based on my experience on what we just demoed, and we're going to have time for Q&A. It's not going to be a super dense session today, but a fun one, hopefully. So I want to kind of frame the discussion around awareness. Why am I talking about awareness and not prevention or mitigation or anything like that? The discussion of awareness, I think, is kind of still, it deserves more attention, because I kind of feel like people are slightly undervalued as a security control. I think people are undervalued as a security control in the sense that we try to solve too many things with just technology, and we have a powerful tool at our disposal, which is the employees, who, when properly educated and prepped up, can prevent a lot of things technology can't. For example, their own mistakes. Might see in many organizations, at least I've seen a process where a new employee comes in and they get a sort of initial training from HR, introducing them to the organization's data security policies and how to handle sensitive data and what actually is sensitive for the organization and so forth. And the new employee probably, remembers some of this stuff for, let's say, 2 weeks, maybe 3 if they're a real miracle of nature, maybe even a couple of months. But over time, after that initial training, that awareness is going to be going down. It's going to go down to a very low level unless people actually get exposed to new reminders of what's actually sensitive over the course of their work and what is expected of them. So here comes the role of awareness. Technology can help with this. We have Purview DLP, which often gets talked about as a security tool. It is that, but it's an awareness tool even more so, I feel like, in as far as where the value comes from. So if you use DLP in a smart way to expose people over time to repeated reminders, repetition itself will raise awareness, whether people want to or not. So that's kind of one aspect of awareness, our awareness as employees of the data we're handling, the information we're handling in various apps, various services, chats, email messages, all that. But there's also kind of another, even less talked about aspect to awareness I feel like deserves the most recognition, which is simply that the admins actually designing these solutions usually don't know what all the processes are in the organization. If we don't know what processes exist, we're going to design our data security solutions on guesswork and kind of partial information and feelings and informed guesses. So awareness kind of goes both ways, and I think this should be talked about more. admins and security responsibles, DLP responsibles need awareness into organizational processes they don't know about to properly design DLP solutions. This is really critical, and I think we're going to kind of delve into this side of things in the demos. So people need awareness of data, admins need aware of processes, and together we can kind of use these two data points to design solutions that work in real life. But let's go into demos. Enough PowerPoint for now. So let's see. Hopping into my virtual machine here. So here's Teams. I don't need to explain what Teams is at Teams Nation. It's a place where we work every day, and we can do all kinds of things in Teams. Probably the most common place where sensitive information kind of gets buried is actually in Teams chats. Since as if you've kept a close eye to discussions today, there's been talk of data governance and how old information gets kind of piled into places and never cleaned up. One of those places where sensitive information gets passed around is in Teams chats. And not all of that information should be passed around in Teams chats. Let's take an example. So Alex Wilbur here, our hero of the day, office worker, he needs to give Christy here in HR some information about a new recruit. There's a new Finnish IT admin that's coming to the organization. Maybe Alex has been part of the recruitment process and needs to pass around some personally identified information on the new recruit for some HR reason. So if we go paste that information, into a chat, Christy, here's the new information. We post it. All right. This information is sensitive in nature, and I might have Alex might have a chat log going back years with Christy. So personal data identifying information will stay there even if the person who got recruited leaves the company. This is actually not something we're supposed to do under GDPR, and we need to be kind of careful with personal data in chats. Now, thanks to a certain Teams DLP rule that we set up, we didn't block anything. We didn't stop Alex from performing this action, but we did kind of give him a little heads up. I'll zoom in a little bit more. So because this piece of this message contained a valid Finnish personally identifying ID string, national ID, the message got flagged. Now, a message getting flagged doesn't really stop anyone from doing anything, but it does give the person sending the message some context on what should be done with the information and how it should be handled. So I think we're seeing here is kind of additional information, a policy tip in Teams. You have here a field for a custom policy tip. Now, customizing this text here is very critical. So I see a lot of organizations setting a policy tip saying something like, please handle this information according to company policy. All right. Well, that's not really useful if I don't know what company policy is. So I would really recommend setting up these tips in a way that are actually explicitly informative and tell people what to do. This can also be localized, by the way, to various languages. In this case, the instruction is to just only expose this information to authorized parties. Could be a lot better even. But the thing we can do here is we don't just need to flag every message the same way that contains this kind of information. This was an internal message. All right. So there's going to be demo effects today. I'm going to warn you, but let's see when we run into them. What about if Alex here decided to start sharing this type of confidential, sensitive information with some external party outside of the organization? What then? Well, I'll use myself as an example. So I'll share this same information with an external. Now, because my own account is external to this organization, the information is the same, but it gets treated differently because the organization's policies say that this kind of information should be kept in-house on this. There's a special case. Okay, the message is blocked, and I really wish there was a kind of a more nuanced message attached to this because it's not actually just blocked. Company policy in this case states that if you have a special reason, valid reason, you can actually do this, and it's kind of represented here as an option to give a justification. Tell admins why I need to do this. What process is this part of? So I could indicate that, let's say, part of cooperation. This is part of cooperation with an external HR partner company, partner organization. This organization is working with an external organization, so this kind of rule, if set to full block, would actually disrupt business processes the admins didn't know about. Since there's an option to override, Alex can now actually send the message, and admins will get, and we'll look into this a bit later, will get information on the process and the justification and can adjust policies accordingly, perhaps whitelist that specific recipient domain. The goal here is always to not mess people's day up. It's more to understand, help people understand data and help admins understand processes. All right. Now, there's all kinds of different scenarios we can build around this. Let's say Alex needs to communicate some more technical stuff to Nestor here. Let's say Alex needs to give Nestor a bunch of, Nestor is an internal colleague, by the way. They actually work together, but Alex needs to, related to a project, needs to give some technical credentials. Now, technical credentials are a really common and good example of stuff that gets passed around in Teams chats that really shouldn't, but really ends up passed around a lot, and it kind of stays there. Usernames, passwords, client secrets, all of that. So as we're kind of passing this sensitive information, even internally, to Nestor, the company policy really says that you shouldn't do this. You should use Azure Key Vault, all of these services. The message gets blocked. However, we're not going to be arrogant admins here. People need the option to tell why exactly they need to take this action. There might be a valid reason, so we're still going to offer the option to indicate why. Related to, this is related to an authorized project, something, project code. The message says that you can override the restriction if you have a valid business justification. Please use secure email instead, for example, or a vault, whatever. So we can get granular with this, and I really recommend you not resorting to hard blocks if you can. Right off the bat, there's an opportunity to learn here both ways. But this is just Teams chats, right? So not everything happens in Teams chats. We have channels. We have all kinds of channels. We have shared channels. We have private channels. So let's take, for example, a scenario where we have an HR working group here, a shared channel under a Teams team. And we have a thread for project status reports. Now, this organization does a lot of projects. They have projects of various levels of sensitivity. There might be some projects that are, normal everyday stuff, nothing special. Like a research team looking for a new technique for nose picking, I'm kind of joking here. But posting information like this, at most, should result in kind of a little policy tip, telling people that being kind of careful when sharing internal project information in Teams. We're not going to stop anyone. Just letting them know, 35 times a year to be kind of careful with project information. However, in certain cases and specific projects might be a bit different in nature. They might be, let's say, projects for governmental agencies that require high levels of discretion. If we use something called an exact data match classifier, we're going to go into that more. There, for example, we're posting information about Project Aurora, Project 72, which is a project to create a new form of biodegradable packaging. Very secret, high confidentiality research with a big budget. If we post information about this project, and the only specific projects, it might get handled differently. Sometimes Teams client can be a bit slow to flag things. Sometimes. So I'm going to show the same thing in chat. So we're going to go back to Christie and report on this project now. Since this specific project has been flagged as sensitive by using an exact data match classifier, this and only this project will actually get blocked when sent to chats. And the message will inform the user doing this that sharing information about these specific types of sensitive projects is only permitted against the business justification. These are supposed to be not spread around all the, everywhere. As you can see, sometimes in the Teams client, Teams DLP can be a bit funny and not show the blocks and flags immediately, especially on virtual machines. If I do it again, it's no problem. But here we get a stronger kind of guidance on how this kind of data should be handled. Not just a block. A block doesn't really tell people anything. There needs to be information on what you're actually supposed to do, right? And why. This is, I think, underappreciated. These kinds of tips, these kinds of message-based granular flagging and blocking and justification requests work on all kinds of contexts. In regular channels, like this one, the general channel. Also in private channels. And in other contexts, what consistency here is key. If you block or even flag something, you're gonna want to think about what you're actually trying to say to the person. You need to be able to say something useful, right? Just please don't refer to company policy. Tell people what they need to do if you're going to use these. That's my tip. We do handle files as well in Teams, right? We do handle files, lots of them. SharePoint sites behind Teams are a pretty big dumping ground of information. So the trouble with these kinds of Teams SharePoint sites is that everything is kind of in a big clump. All the sensitive stuff is clumped in with all the general stuff. And people, when handling files, don't really have any clear indication of what's really more sensitive than other stuff. But thanks to Teams DLP, once again, we can actually start kind of giving people some neural, little electric shocks with these icons here related to, depending on the informational content. So as you can see, there's a bunch of Teams DLP policies flagging various kinds of content under files. Some content is more sensitive than others. It might get different kinds of indicators here. The little warning sign indicator, when hovered over, says that this file may contain sensitive information. That's it. It's just little reminder that this file might be more sensitive than others, basically due to a policy tip. There's no blocking or restrictions attached to that. However, if you have files that are actually restricted because of their informational content somehow, like for example, external sharing is not permitted, that file will get a different kind of indicator. And further pulling these two things apart, data you're just supposed to be aware of, and data you need to actually, that you are actively restricted from handling in a certain way. If we hover over this stop icon here, related to restrictive DLP policies in Teams, it tells us that this file contains sensitive information and some comments aren't available. I opened briefly a file previously that contained technical credentials for demo use. If we open this file up, we will get some more information. Don't mind the finish. We get the same kind of policy tip as we got in chat consistently here in the files as well. Now this file is in SharePoint, but Teams DLP actually does reach all the way to files in Teams and files shared over Teams from OneDrive and shows the same tips. In this case, it tells us that sharing clear text credentials over Teams is not permitted. Well, in this case, this file would actually be against policy since it's blatantly just sharing clear text credentials. But we could override this as well. Some of you with very sharp eyes would actually see a problem with this policy tip. This tip talks about the restriction even though there's no hard restriction in place. That's just inconsistency from my part. We can use all kinds of different classifiers that were actually talked about in the previous session, classifiers to detect various kinds of sensitive information. For example, the project numbers and the sensitive projects were identified based on a combination of a running project identifier and certain other keywords in the information. That's just one type of way to detect information and inform people about it. There are other ways like trainable classifiers, for example, machine learning based classifiers. If your working language is English, then congratulations, you're good to go with the built-in ones and to some extent in other languages like Spanish. If you're working in, let's say, Finnish, you need to think about training your own, which is possible. Let's take an example here. There's a budget document here. We'll look into it in more detail soon. There's a budget document here. There's an indication that this document may contain sensitive information. And if you look at the details of the document, we get a more detailed policy tip saying that this item contains sensitive information. If we look at the policy tip in even more detail, we actually see the information that this item contains financial information. Now, I have no actual, I'm only using a trainable classifier to identify this. So if we open the file, I have not created a sensitive information type to detect anything in this document. I'm only using a trainable classifier. There's a budget report here, and it can be just detected simply based on the machine learning model. We give a policy tip that this is financial information and certain actions are actually required from the person. This policy tip can be shown every single time the person operates with this document. So it's kind of powerful when used correctly. Trainable classifiers have a couple of caveats. I'm going to go into those at the end of the session. And while this session isn't on the topic of sensitivity labels, this talk isn't on the subject of sensitivity labels per se. I'm going to give an example where DLP and sensitive information, more like sensitive information types and awareness raising will be relevant. I'm going to create a new document here live. So let's pull up a new Excel worksheet. Let's say HR information, for example. I'm going to dump in some, personally identifying information from another document. Mandatory labeling strikes again. This demo is actually not going to work since I'm enforcing mandatory labeling. I just came up with this live. The idea here is that you can still use these kinds of sensitive information types to recommend sensitivity labels and have the person actually take action. I can't demo it right now, but similarly to how you get policy tips, based on the information content of the file, you can actually get recommended without automatically labeling. You can just recommend people that you should probably set a elevated sensitivity label because this file contains personally identifying information. I actually do recommend going this route first because it forces people to think for a second before making the choice, raising awareness through repetition. All right. So there's a couple of different ways to raise awareness through Teams: chats, channel messages, files, both granularly for, just when sharing for internals, you can show one type of message. When sharing to externals or specific domains, you can show another type of message. You can show these kinds of policy tips in private channels, shared channels. What about group chats? That's one that we haven't really covered. So we have an internal working group here, HR working group, only internal members, no externals. We'll post some personally identifying information, for example, to this one. No problem. Message just going to get flagged. What about if we extend this group chat to also contain, let's say, a single external member? Now remember that external members aren't really supposed to get this personally identifying information. Now what happens here, luckily, is Teams creates a new group chat. If we have a mix of people, it still respects the rules, and I cannot really share PII or any other sensitive information into a group chat with externals included, even if there's internals as well. So if the person shares something to a group chat like 50 members and they don't realize there's externals included, a very common thing I've seen, you're not going to read through every person that might have been added along the way. DLP kind of lets you know, hold on, if you're going to send this here, it's going to get exposed to externals, and you need to kind of check if what you're doing is actually smart and maybe learn something. It's kind of here to protect users and not really do hard cybersecurity blocking. One of my wishes to Microsoft, I have a couple of wishes. If somebody from Microsoft is like sneakily listening in, I would really wish that there would be different colors for these. Messages getting flagged is one thing. It should probably not be red, to be honest, more like orange. Blocking could be red, and even then you could have a separate color if hopefully if an override is possible, and it could actually indicate it here. Now, right now it doesn't, so people actually have to be educated to check this "what can I do" message to find the override button. So when communicating about this to people, make sure you actually demo stuff and not just tell them via email, so they understand they can override these momentary blocks. All right, a couple of tips then from experience around DLP in Teams. We got a bit of time left. Just a single demo effect, and that was because I invented a new demo scenario midway through. About scoping, there's a couple of weird things with Teams DLP scoping in particular that doesn't affect other DLP workloads. So if you're running a pilot for Teams DLP, you're going to want to have both a security or distribution group and a Microsoft 365 group, one or more, and have the same people, pilot users, in both of those, because Teams DLP shows up in different contexts unless it's scoped to all users based on what types of group are used to scope the policy. So if you use security groups or distribution groups, you're going to see those messages, DLP, taken effect in chats, to simplify. And if you use Microsoft 365 groups, you're going to see for the files and messages in that group. So you're going to need to use both to pilot effectively all of the capabilities. It can be confusing. So when you move to all users, then these problems go away, of course. And one thing as well, Teams does use, as we all know, probably, Teams does use SharePoint and OneDrive as file storage backend. OneDrive for chats, file shared in chats, and SharePoint for file shared in, for example, Teams. So you can also use OneDrive and SharePoint DLP to cover Teams. Those OneDrive and SharePoint DLP rules also affect Teams normally. So you're going to have actually two sets of DLP rules if you separate the workloads, to Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint. You're going to have potentially 3 different DLP policies affecting Teams at one time. One more reason to plan out your DLP solution, like in a single pane of glass, Excel sheet or whatever, so you understand the total impact of your rules. Making policy tips, making sensitivity label name tooltips, everything possible understandable is the key to success here. If you're going to want to guide people, you're probably going to want them to understand what you're saying. So localization is key here. You can use PowerShell to do that. It's not in the graphical user interface for whatever reason, but you can use PowerShell to localize DLP policy tips, and you should do that. Figure out all the languages your organization has widely represented and just apply localization. It's easy once you have it's documented. You can click the link. Oh, you can't because I'm not using PowerPoint Live, but it's in Docs or Microsoft Learn how to do it. You can take a screenshot. So you need to set it up using PowerShell, but then after that's done, the Office app language will be used to determine which language policy tips are shown in. So if Teams is in Finnish, then the tips will be in Finnish if that's set up. Any languages not in the translations, specifically defined translations here, will use the default language you set up in the DLP rule or the default text. Also, be mindful that you now have the option of optical character recognition. This kind of has flown under the radar for some organizations, I think, but it's starting to be there. You can actually detect all of those credentials and PII and all of that stuff in images as well. Images are often passed around inline images and such in Teams and as attachments. I'm actually not sure if inline images are yet supported for scanning. I'm kind of 50-60 on that, maybe someone can say, but at least images shared as attachments are supported. And I'm seeing this work. So you can start using OCR now. It has a slight cost associated to it, but it's nothing ridiculous. It's only a certain small cost per each unique image per organization, so it doesn't get insane if there are many copies of the same image that are the same. And exact data match, I think it's really slept on a lot because it's kind of technically demanding to set up in a way. It's not as straightforward as some other capabilities, but it's really valuable for making sure that most important information, whether it's project IDs or product development details, that the most important information gets handled differently. Because when you can have an EDM in place, you can have pretty strict controls only for a specific subset of information without blanket blocking everything. So you can actually separate the diamonds from the dirt, let's say. I'm not saying a regular project is dirt, it's just that there are different types of information. Now, setting up EDM is technically demanding a bit more, so make sure you have someone who knows Purview solutions or read the documentation really carefully when you try to use them. Talking about trainable classifiers, they are pretty powerful. Thing is, most documents don't just fall into the scope of a single trainable classifier, but multiples. For example, trade secret information and financial information and even tax information can all be kind of found in a single document. So if you use trainable classifiers in DLP, it's very smart to design the solution very carefully so that you actually understand what you're affecting with your policies. You can, for example, combine trainable classifiers with traditional sensitive information types to look for documents with credit card numbers and business plans and something else to bring down the, let's say, false positive rates and such. Trainable classifiers are also mostly limited to English. Some classifiers have some other languages supported, but you can train your own. I've heard some rumors that Microsoft is going to make this even easier, training your own classifiers, but we'll see. It's already possible. Takes a bit of work, but it's doable. If you train your own, you can just make it support any language, as long as you can provide some training material. So probably my favorite way to start providing policy tips in any Microsoft 365 service, initially is document fingerprints. You simply take a empty document template, let's say a work contract, and through the compliance portal, it just takes like 5 minutes to create a simple document fingerprint of it, after which you can then apply DLP rules, show policy tips, all of that across Microsoft 365 services, and yes, also in Teams for like field versions of that document, like field work contracts. You can even discover those files across services. Very powerful. Some limitations to be aware of. The maximum file size for the template is 4 megabytes. I had some problems back in the day when I was trying to create a document fingerprint for like an Excel budget planning worksheet that was like 11 megabytes. There were some issues there because of the size. So that's a topic for another day. Also, you can have, I think, currently 50 of these per tenant, so don't go crazy. You need to limit how many of these you create for now, but 50 is plenty. And how to get started for real, I would do the following. I would look at the sensitive information types in Microsoft Learn. There's a list of them there. See which ones apply to your organization or the organization you're working for. Map those out in, I don't know, an Excel sheet or Loop, even better Loop. Figure out if you want to just show policy tips when that sensitive information is handled. Figure out when you want to ask for a justification. And if in some cases you might even be able to say that you want to block a certain scenario, but please use it very sparingly unless you're absolutely sure you're not messing up business processes. I would build a separate rule, DLP rule for each distinct scenario, just because you can then customize the policy tip texts according to scenario, which is very useful since you want to inform people and not just block things. And comms are very important. If people start seeing these literal red flags in their teams without knowing what they are, they're going to freak out. Red flags freak people out if they don't know what they are. So having a round of trainings with demos, communication, telling people we're just trying to keep you informed here is all, will help prepare the organization. So after all this is done, you can start to roll out the pilot, fine-tune it, and then roll out the production. I would really get started with policy tips only even. It's an easy route to go without messing things up. All right, I think we're about the time. This was a pretty quick one. Just the key takeaway here, I guess, is that awareness building goes both ways, not just from admins to users, but from users to admins. Let's roll back. We have 2 minutes. I'm going to show you one more thing. All right, one more thing. We were talking about admins. So all of these aspects of what events that we generate end up somewhere, right? They end up in the active people, for example, gave for their actions. Here's a quick example, hopefully. All right. So I'm gonna use Activity Explorer to filter things a little bit. I'm going to only look at certain DLP policy matches here. Let's say for Teams and all workloads. And I'm going to show the justification column here. Maybe it's somewhere. There you go. Just so you can see this before I wrap it up. We have all kinds of DLP matches here, but in this case, the DLP rule undo action means that somebody overrode the block and gave some kind of justification. It's right here. Once we start seeing these justifications in admin, we can compile them and start fine-tuning our policies to take, to take into account what people actually need to do. But this is why we ask for justification, so admins can fine-tune things. All right. Now it's time for me to wrap up. We have lots of other great sessions to come. So if you want to ask questions, I think we have a little bit of time for that. And once we run out of time, I'm in the chat afterwards as well, with a bit of a delay since I'm moderating. So